Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In the last video, I have shared with you the 5 things that you should stop doing and start doing if you want to improve faster. And one of the things that I covered there was stop watching gear reviews and start learning the basics. And this sub-series, so to speak, will be covering just that. Hello everyone, again my name is Ian Fresnetti, and in this channel I usually cover photography basics for beginners created by, so to speak, a beginner like myself. And today we'll be covering the exposure triangle. It is the foundation of understanding how your camera sees light. But don't worry, I promise I will keep this beginner friendly, and in the future videos I'll be walking you through with real examples using natural light or continuous light, so we are not going to use strobes or flash yet. So in this video, I will be covering what exposure is, the exposure triangle on a high level. I'll be going through each component of the exposure triangle, like the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, and the balancing act that you need to do in all these three to get the proper exposure, therefore giving you a good image. And lastly, I'll be discussing why you always need to start with the intent in order for you to know which corner of the triangle you should adjust first. If you're ready like me, let's go. So number 1, let's cover what is exposure. Exposure, simply put, is how bright or how dark your image is. Every time you press the shutter, your camera measures light hitting the sensor. So if there's too much light, your image will be what we call overexposed or too bright. It's like, turning on a flashlight and pointing it directly into your eye. So that's pretty much how I can explain that. The other side of the spectrum would be if the image is too dark, then we call that underexposed. So yeah, it's too dark. You almost could not see anything. And whenever you see an image wherein you can see everything and it looks beautiful, chances are that photo had been properly exposed. So it's what we call a well-balanced shot. So how do we control the exposure to ensure that we are getting or nailing down a good photo each and every time? That's where the exposure triangle comes in. Let's now cover the big picture, the exposure triangle. The exposure triangle is made up of the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. All of these three can make your image brighter or darker, and each of these affects the amount of light hitting the sensor. But here's the important part. They don't just control brightness, they also affect the creative look of your image. So if you adjust one corner of the exposure triangle, the image might become darker or brighter, and you will need to make adjustments on the remaining two, either both or just one, to again put your image back to a proper exposure. So I want you to think of the exposure triangle as light control plus creative control, and that's the real beauty of photography. So in this next part, I'll be covering the 3 components of the exposure triangle. This is just going to be high level, and these are the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. It will depend on the creative intent, because with number 1, shutter speed, it controls motion. If you want to capture or stop or freeze a movement or motion, let's say you want to capture like a ball being thrown in an image mid-air, then you need to make adjustments to your shutter. And let's say you just want to capture a motion blur of a moving subject, then it's also the shutter speed that you need to adjust. So if you move your camera lens and take a look at your camera sensor, whenever you press the shutter button, literally a shutter curtain closes and opens up. Faster shutter speed means it like chops it rapidly. That's the best way I can put it. So just imagine a window. If you close the window, like it's currently open, then you close it, there's just a small time window that the light can enter through the window. But if you slow that down, a slower shutter, the shutter will close slowly and open up slowly, therefore letting more light in. So a faster shutter will freeze motion, while a slower shutter speed will give you motion blur. Again, faster, less light, slower, more light. So if you want to freeze motion, you start with shutter speed. Same with if you want to create motion blur, you will adjust the shutter speed. But increasing the shutter speed will darken your image. So that's when you would need to make adjustments either to the aperture or your ISO. So if the shutter speed controls motion, aperture on the other hand controls background blur or depth of field. Aperture is represented by f numbers or f stops. So the lowest that I have is f1.4, and you will see ones that are on f16. All that means is, so you can think of it this way. Literally inside a lens, a camera lens, there are blades. The lower the number, let's say 1.4, those blades open up like very, very wide. If you go up the number like f8 or f16, those blades become smaller, therefore giving you just a very small opening, and it makes everything in frame in focus. So how does this affect light? So if you are using a lower number on your aperture like f1.4, the blades are wide open, therefore more light can come in. And if you have a subject in the middle, the background will be so blurry, or what we say, basag na basag yung likod. Now, if you go up the number, let's say f8, like f4, f8, then those blades become smaller, giving you a smaller opening. With smaller opening, it darkens the image and it puts like almost everything in frame in focus. So if your creative goal is to create portraits with blurry background, then you need to use a lower f number. If you're capturing a landscape wherein everything should be in focus, then you need to go for a higher f number. So if shutter speed controls motion and the aperture controls the background blur or depth of field, then the ISO controls the camera sensor's sensitivity to light. A higher ISO number will give you a brighter image, but there will be a big chance of the image having noise. A noise is like the grainy parts of the photo, and you don't want that, at least not right now that you're learning the basics. But some people like that for creative purposes, but for now, we want to keep the noise to a minimum. A lower ISO number, like ISO 100, will give you a cleaner photo, but it will be darker. It's important to note that ISO does not add light. It just increases your camera sensor sensitivity to the light that's already available. Because higher ISO adds noise or grain, then you can use that as a last resort to your adjustments or to the adjustments that you're making on the exposure triangle. Now, since we've already covered what each of the components does, we'll now move to the compensation part or the balancing act of these three. Here's the mindset. Whenever you adjust one part of the exposure triangle, you most of the time would have to make adjustments to the remaining two to maintain proper exposure. So as mentioned earlier, with shutter speed, let's say you want to get motion blur, so you slow down the amount of time that your shutter opens and closes, then you're letting in more light, which might overexpose your image. In that case, you might want to adjust your aperture to a higher number to close the blades in order for the exposure to get compensated. You have slowed down your shutter, making the image brighter, but then you closed down your aperture, putting the image back to a proper exposure by darkening it. This balance is what makes photography both challenging and fun. Having said all that, my main point here would be not only understanding the basics, but understanding your starting point. And your starting point will always be on the intent. A lot of beginners ask, what setting should I use? What camera should I buy? What lens is the best for this purpose? And the answer is, it depends on your intent. What do you want the photo to look like? Do you want to freeze the motion or drag the motion? You start with shutter speed. Do you want a blurry background? Adjust the aperture. Low light and no tripod? Then adjust the ISO. Once you have chosen your priority, you then adjust the other two to maintain proper exposure. Some people might argue that, no, it's okay, you can always adjust the ISO because if you get noise or grain, most of the editing software out there can do a denoise, or practically they are removing the noise from the image. But what I'm trying to teach in this channel is for you to become a good photographer, and not a good editor. Of course, you can always be both, but since we're talking about foundations, we'll try our best to get everything right in camera, and the editing or the post-processing, like removing of noise, what have you, will be used as an enhancement or a last resort. But editing should not replace the good foundation of understanding the basics of your camera. So a quick philosophy check. Some people treat the exposure triangle like a hard, fast rule, but here's how I want you to think about it. The exposure triangle is a guide or a rule of thumb. You can absolutely break it, but only after you already have a good grasp of the basics. You should understand it well first before intentionally breaking it for creative purposes. So you don't need perfection, you just need understanding. We're almost at the end of our primer, so what's next? In the upcoming videos, we'll look at each part of the triangle with real examples. So in part 2, we'll be covering shutter speed, like freezing or blurring the motion. Part 3 will cover aperture, which is background blur plus depth of field. And part 4 will cover ISO. We'll know when to raise that or when to keep it down. And most probably that's when I'll be covering white balance as well, because that's just a short topic, mostly misunderstood by a lot of people just like myself. But hey, we're all learning here. So we'll keep it simple, we'll keep it real world, and we'll keep it practical. So we are just going to use continuous light or natural light, depending on what's available by the time that I shoot those episodes. And we're not going to use strobes or flash yet. If you enjoyed this and you'd like to grow with me, and if you know people who might benefit from the things that I'm teaching here, please make sure to hit like, subscribe, and share to those people. If you want to see my work, please do follow me in my socials. It's Second Shot Studio, both on Facebook and Instagram. Or if you want to see my personal journey in photography, then you can follow my personal public page at Jan Fresnetti. Again, no pressure, just keep on practicing. We're all in this together. Like I always say, keep on learning, keep on creating. That's how you get better, and not through spending hours and hours of watching gear reviews. Till the next video.